My name is Jonathan Geyer, and this is the Pennsylvania Woodmobile. The Woodmobile is an educational trailer that is operated through the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture's Hardwoods Development Council with the support of the state's hardwood industry. The Woodmobile visits schools, fairs, and festivals, and many other events all across the state. And now we're bringing it to you, wherever you are, virtually. How many things can you think of that are made from wood? In your home, you might have wooden floors, furniture, or kitchen cabinets. You may have wooden toys or play baseball with a wooden bat. Before all of these wood products were made, they were trees in the forest. Did you know that nearly 60% of Pennsylvania is covered in trees, and 90% of those trees are hardwood trees? There are two types of trees that grow in Pennsylvania, hardwood trees and softwood trees. The technical name for a hardwood tree is deciduous. Deciduous trees are trees that have leaves, and their seeds come from a flower. The most abundant deciduous trees or hardwood trees growing in Pennsylvania are red oak, white oak, black cherry, sugar maple, and red maple. The wood from these trees is great for furniture, flooring, cabinets, and much more. The technical name for a softwood tree is coniferous. A coniferous tree has needles rather than leaves, and their seeds come from cones. The most abundant coniferous trees or softwood trees in Pennsylvania are white pine, spruce, and eastern hemlock. Just because we refer to it as softwood does not mean it is not strong. Our homes are built with softwood lumber because it is more abundant and therefore less expensive. Trees are very important. They not only provide us with wood to build with, but they also give us oxygen, provide good-paying jobs that support many families, help clean water, provide food and shelter for animals, and so much more. Can you think of other things that forests provide? Have you ever eaten a hickory nut or even a walnut? What about pancakes? Pennsylvania is actually one of the leading states in maple syrup production. The forest products industry in Pennsylvania practices sustainable forestry. This means that when trees are cut down, the foresters and loggers use best practices to be sure that new seedlings grow back. This results in a young forest. Young forests are also very beneficial to the environment. They provide things that older forests cannot, like great bird habitat, especially for the ruffed grouse, our state bird here in Pennsylvania. Did you know that Pennsylvania has the largest hardwood forest in the United States? And every year, the volume of that forest grows nearly twice the volume of what we normally harvest or cut down. Pennsylvania has roughly 16.62 million acres of forest land. Of that, about 70% is owned by an estimated 740,000 private forest landowners. The remaining 30% are publicly owned by either the federal, state, or local governments. Let's go check out the Pennsylvania Woodmobile and learn about sustainable forestry and how trees grow. Come on. When walking through the forest, you might see all different sizes and types of trees. But in order to properly determine the age of a tree, you have to count the annual growth rings. This is a cross-section of a black cherry tree. We call this a tree cookie. The outer edge is the bark. The bark protects the tree. Different tree species have different bark. Black cherry trees have a rough, scaly, dark black bark like this, but other trees like the American beech tree have a very smooth, light gray bark. The inner layer of the bark is called the phloem. The phloem is a thin layer of living cells that is responsible for transporting food throughout the tree. Large amounts of sugar travel down the phloem from the leaves to the roots. The layer just under the bark is called the cambium. Every year, this is where the trees grow new cells. The next two sections make up the majority of the tree, the sapwood and the heartwood. This area is the sapwood. It is also referred to as the xylem. This is where water and nutrients are transported up from the roots to the branches, leaves, and twigs. Eventually, the older layers of the sapwood die and change color. This then is referred to as heartwood. The heartwood is what gives the tree its strength and support. The ring in the very center is the oldest part of the tree. A tree makes one ring of growth each year. So, to determine how old a tree is, all you need to do is count all of its rings. You can tell a lot about a tree's life by looking at its rings. Wider rings are an indicator that the tree had plenty of sunlight, water, and nutrients that year, where narrow rings could indicate a year where there was a drought. Sometimes you can even tell if there was a fire. The rings may look black compared to the others. Since Pennsylvania experiences all 4 seasons, our trees tend to grow slower than trees in warmer climates. Because our trees grow slower, all of their rings tend to be closer together. This results in more sturdy lumber and higher quality wood products. Trees do not live forever. They age and will eventually die. Sometimes they die of old age or being too crowded with other trees. Other times they may die from disease or invasive insects. Thankfully, the forest products industry can harvest the trees and turn them into wood products before they die. Did you know that wood is the greenest building material? Meaning there is very little harm to the environment when harvesting trees and turning them into wood products. As trees grow, they take in carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas, and when there are high concentrations of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the Earth's temperature increases. Through a process called photosynthesis, trees take in carbon dioxide molecules and divide them into separate carbon and oxygen molecules. The tree releases the oxygen, and that is what we breathe in. When the tree is harvested and turned into lumber, and then eventually into a wood product, such as a table, the carbon that was once stored in the tree is now stored in that table, keeping the carbon out of the atmosphere. Other building materials, such as plastic, metal, glass, and concrete, actually add carbon dioxide to the environment. This is one reason why choosing wood products is one of the best choices you can make for the environment. Let's watch a time lapse showing what happens to a forest as it grows over time. The purpose of this experimental forest was to study how the forest would naturally regenerate after a clear cut. This photo was taken in 1927, before any trees were harvested. This forest was harvested in 2 parts. First, in 1927, the larger trees that were suitable for lumber production were cut. Then, in 1928, most of the remaining trees were cut. The trees from the second harvest were smaller and went on to be used as chemical wood, which means chemicals and gases were extracted from the wood. By 1937, there were thousands of saplings that grew back. None of these trees were planted. They had all naturally regenerated. After the larger trees were removed, the seeds in the soil had the space, the sunlight, and the water they needed to grow. In just 10 years, some of these trees were already an inch in diameter. This photo was taken in 1947. All of the trees in the picture here are 20 years old, but some are quite larger than others. This is due to the growth characteristics of each species and competition for available sunlight, water, nutrients, and space. By 1958, tree species had become quite distinct. The black cherry trees in the left foreground have the characteristic black flaky bark. This forest has many trees in it. Remember, none of these trees were planted. The forest naturally grew back. In 1968, you can see that the forest had inherently reduced the number of trees. This self-thinning occurs naturally since some trees grow faster and taller than others, blocking out the sunlight from reaching the slower or shorter growing trees below. For example, this photo from 1978 shows 2 black cherry trees towering over other trees, even though all the trees are the same age. Black cherry trees are fast-growing trees if they have lots of sunlight. By 1989, the trees are beginning to grow large enough to harvest for lumber. In 1998, the trees have grown even larger. The forest is becoming very mature, and there are not many new trees growing because they cannot compete with the larger trees for sunlight, water, and nutrients. This picture from 2008 shows 2 black cherry trees on the left and the sugar maple cluster on the right. Remember that even though these trees vary in size, all 3 are 80 years old. The most recent picture of the cane experimental forest was taken in 2018. The trees pictured here are all 90 years old. This is a good example of what an unmanaged forest looks like. If the landowner would have harvested some trees back in 1958 or 1968, the average tree size of the forest in 2018 would have been significantly larger, and there would have been more young trees in the stand. During a thinning harvest, the less desirable trees are removed, allowing the remaining trees to receive more sunlight, water, and nutrients, and allowing them to grow more quickly. This also allows for new trees to grow, and a forest with trees of varying ages is considered healthier. After watching what happens to a forest that has been unmanaged, let's see what an actively managed forest looks like. This is a forester. A forester is someone who cares for the forest and ensures that it is healthy. A forester helps a landowner develop a forest management plan that will achieve their goals for the land. Whether the landowner wants to have a healthy working forest, creating wildlife or bird habitat, or sustainably harvest trees, a forester can help them determine the correct course of action. In this case, the landowner is interested in sustainably harvesting their trees. After the forester determines which trees should be harvested, they mark them so the logger knows which ones to cut. It is then the logger's turn to visit the forest. The logger's duty is to safely harvest the tree, ensuring that it retains its value. You can see the logger has a lot of equipment other than his chainsaw. Much of a logger's equipment is for safety. This includes a hard hat, ear and eye protection, special steel-toed boots, and chaps that cover his legs, protecting them from being cut by the chainsaw. After the logger safely fells the tree, the next step is to delimb and buck it. Bucking a tree means to measure and cut the log into the lengths the sawmill requires. The limbs are cut off and left in the forest. This brush may cause the forest floor to look messy. However, this is extremely important. Over time, these limbs will decompose and add nutrients back into the soil. The limbs also help in creating a barrier around young saplings, allowing them to grow and keeping the deer from eating them. Once the log is bucked, the skidder can then drag the logs to the landing. The landing is typically an open area where logs are stacked before being loaded onto a log truck. A log truck is designed to hold many logs and transport them to the sawmill. Have you ever seen a full log truck on its way to the sawmill? Threats to the forest come in many shapes and sizes. Some of the main threats are invasive plants, diseases, forest fires, white-tailed deer, humans, and invasive insects. Invasive plants outcompete native trees by growing rapidly and forming a dense covering on the forest floor. Be on the lookout for these and other invasive plants. Just like humans, trees can get sick. Certain tree diseases can weaken a tree and can eventually lead to a tree's death. Most tree diseases are specific to certain tree species. Tree diseases can be spread by insects. Others can be airborne or found in the soil. Luckily, forest fires are not as great of a threat to Pennsylvania as they are to western states. This is because Pennsylvania's forest is predominantly hardwood. Hardwood trees do not contain highly flammable resins. They have leaves, and leaves are less flammable than softwood needles, and hardwood trees produce less debris on the forest floor than softwood trees do. Did you know that nearly all forest fires in Pennsylvania are caused directly by humans? Remember what Smokey Bear says, only you can prevent forest fires. No animal in the eastern United States has a more direct effect on sustainability of the forest than the white-tailed deer. The average deer eats roughly 6 to 8 pounds of browse a day. That browse may consist of leaves, branches, and seedlings. In forests that are overpopulated with deer, young seedlings are eaten before they have a chance to grow out of reach. When deer herd populations are at healthy levels, the forest has a better chance at regenerating. All throughout history, humans have used the forest for food, shelter, the wood resource, medicine, recreation, and much more. Over time, we have learned that in order to ensure that future generations have forested areas to enjoy, we have adopted various sustainable forestry practices. However, with the growing human population, we are still a threat to the forest. Forest fragmentation is an issue across the United States and the world. This is when large tracts of forest are segmented into smaller patches, which are then often isolated from each other by no forest habitat. Prime examples of forest fragmentation are residential housing developments, commercial shopping facilities, and highways. Forest parcelization is another issue our forests are facing. This is when more and more landowners are owning small tracts of forest without the primary purpose of forest management. The final threat to the forest is invasive insects. Invasive insects are insects that are not native. They often come from other countries and they wreak havoc on the local environment. The Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture needs your help stopping bad bugs like the spotted lanternfly, walnut twig beetle, and Asian longhorn beetle. This topic is so important to the health of our forest that there's a special video about the woodmobile and invasive insects. You may want to watch that video next. Thank you for joining me for this introduction to Pennsylvania hardwoods. What's the most interesting thing you learned today?